Welcome to On the Bobble Podcast Episode 4. I'm your host, Sabasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Similar to last week, we're going to be doing a deep dive into Dromai, and we're going to go over her general game plan, key cards, and how to play against each hero in the format. And finally, the deck outline. But before we go into that, so how was your week this week, Yuki?
My week's been pretty good. On the weekend, I went down to Portland to play the Battle Hardened down there. Two other locals and I just drove down, made a road trip. It's about a 5.5, 6 hour drive for context. So not too bad. We drove down on the Friday evening, stayed the night, and then played the Battle Hardened on Saturday and drove back after the event. So that was quite a bit of fun. I ended up taking Viscerai to the event. I went 5-1-1. The draw in particular was a little bit disappointing. I drew into Dromai and I probably had lethal on the next turn, but I just played a little bit too slow. If I had saved kind of 10 to 30 seconds, I think I probably would have had the game, but it was also definitely on me. I don't think my opponent was necessarily playing too slow. I think that there's a lot in my control that I could have done to just play a little bit faster. I just didn't realize how close we were to time. So a little bit unfortunate, but that's how it goes. I ended up bubbling out at 10th place. So not a bad showing, but not exactly what I was hoping for either. But yeah, other than that, just been getting ready for going to Europe and going to Lille. So that's coming up soon and looking forward to it. How's your week been, Jay?
Yeah, so I ended up going to my local skirmish. So it was a sealed skirmish and there wasn't that many people down because you guys went down to Portland. I think there was about 10 players in it. I ended up going 4-0. I played a Phi. Yeah, it was a pretty... I think I was the only 3-0 going into the fourth round. So I locked up first before I played my last match, but still won the last match anyways. So that was good. And we also did a draft at the same thing. And I 3-0'd with Icelander and I got second place. So this was a separate event. Like we did the skirmish for 4 rounds, and because there's only 10 players, we decided to just do a separate draft with 10 players. So we don't have to like basically say to 2 people, "Oh, you can't play this draft." And we included everyone, but then I 3-0'd the draft and still got second, same as last week. It was a little frustrating, but what can I do, right? How does pairings go?
Yeah, sometimes it's just up to the breakers when you have those small armories and people don't feel like playing the extra round, but oh well. At least you did well.
Yeah, I played well. My decks were great. But gem is a thing. Well, let's move on to the question of the week. Thank you for everyone who submitted their questions on Twitter. We really need to post a new one so we can get some new questions in. Hopefully closer before you leave for Lil, if you can post something on Twitter, that would be nice.
Yeah, I'll probably have something up before the listener for you listeners. When you listen to this, I'll probably have something up before then. So just keep an eye out, and if there are questions that you'd like to have answered, let us know. There's a couple that we haven't gone through, but we have gone through quite a lot of them. So we'd be curious to get more questions from you.
So this week's question come from Sam George, or Payne, and they asked, "I would like to know how viable you consider forcing a hero or being the one sending the signals." What do you think, Yuki?
In Uprising in particular, as we discussed in the last episode, Phi has a very deep card pool and can support a lot of drafters. And so if you end up forcing Phi, you will usually get quite a playable deck and sometimes even quite a good one. So I think in Uprising in particular, if you are not that comfortable on draft, forcing could be a pretty decent strategy or maybe even the right strategy. That being said, it's never really going to be totally optimal. The extreme case is always like if everybody forces a hero, then there's a lot of reason to be in the other heroes because they'll be so underdrafted. And if if 7 people are on, this would never happen, but if there was 6 people on Phi, 1 on Icelander, 1 on Dromai, the Icelander and Dromai decks would be incredibly strong. So draft always kind of has this nature of being a little bit self-correcting, and even when a hero is really good and represented a lot and maybe you can force it, it will be correct some amount of the time to find that open lane of Icelander or Dromai, or maybe sometimes Fi is correct for your seed. But I think if you're really trying to maximize like every win percentage you can get, staying open and finding the open lane is going to help you do that. But it is difficult to do, and if you misevaluate and get in the wrong lane, it can sometimes be quite punishing.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I think the one thing I just need to say would be careful of when you mean by sending signals. I wouldn't put too much emphasis on sending signals in general, just because you don't know what cards the players to your left think are signals and doesn't think are signals. For example, some people might take a blue Sigil Protection as a signal that Icelander is open, but you might not value that card as highly as a blue Frosting. So you pick that up, and then they might still move into Icelander being like, oh, blue Sigil Protection, this card's amazing, so they're going to go into Icelander as well. So sending a signal doesn't always mean that the other person receiving it can figure out that you're in that hero. And so you don't want to be too worried about what signals you're sending, but more figuring out which lane is open for you is going to be much more proactive, I think. Is that a good word of saying that?
Yeah, I think it's more proactive and you have more control over it, because ultimately, like, regardless of whether or not the players passing to you are trying to send a signal, if you can notice that something is not being drafted, that, or if something is being under drafted and you have a good opportunity to draft it, it doesn't really matter if they were intentionally signaling you or not, as long as you're picking up and reading that situation correctly. Also, kind of like adding on to what Jay was saying about reading signals being more important, is that you get 2 packs passed to you from your right, and you only get 1 pack passed to you from your left. So reading the signals means like you kind of benefit for like 2 packs worth of cards. Whereas when you try to, if you are trying to send signals, even if you do that successfully, you're only getting the 1 pack in pack 2. So that can help. But if you need to draft a 30 card deck, that's not going to be all of your picks by any means. So usually paying attention to what you're being passed has a much larger weight than what you're passing to other people.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. You want to move on to the main topic?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about Dromai.
Okay, so first, when we talk about any of our heroes, let's talk about how many Dromais we expect in a draft pod. What do you think right now?
Honestly, I think about 1 to 2 Dromais. 2 is probably the right number. If there's 1 Dromai, the drafter, the Dromai deck should be very, very strong. But I think that anything beyond 2, it starts to get a bit dicey. Like even 3 Dromais. It is possible that one of the Dromais will end up with a solid deck, but the other 2 probably won't. And generally, like if I could know ahead of time how many Dromais are going to be in a pod, and I knew it was going to be 3 if I drafted her, I would never want to draft her. Of course, you don't always know that, but yeah, I just think that she's just so particular about needing like the Ash generators, the dragons, the red go-agains. We'll talk about everything she needs, but Dromai, maybe even more than Icelander, needs very specific cards to function and has like kind of a shallow card pool. There's some underperformers, so usually she doesn't support as many heroes.
Yeah, I think a big reason of that would be like Dromai really benefits from her rares more than the other 2 heroes. And I think that directly correlates to how many Dromais can be in a pod, where in pods where multiple premium dragons get opened, it gets a little bit more or easier for people to be in Dromai. But that's just not the case. We don't know what rares are going to be open, and not all the rares are going to be open every pod. So that's gonna lower these the physical deck counts to 1 or 2 Dromais per 8-man pod.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just move into the game plan of Dromai. So Dromai, of course, can make dragons, but in order to make those dragons, you also need to make Ash tokens. So I've seen Dromai decks that almost don't make dragons at all, and Dromai decks that lean more into making dragons. So I think like how much you lean into that strategy is somewhat flexible, but you do need to make sure that if you are making dragons, you have Ash to go along with it. Generally, pitching reds for Ash is not something that you can do very often, particularly in the Fi matchup, because he's just so aggressive that if you're just taking time off to like pitch a red to play a sweeping blows or a billowing mirage, it's just a little bit too slow. So I think that what Dromai's game plan really is kind of maximizing card efficiency, and she can do that both aggressively as well as defensively. She kind of has these like overcosted phantasm attacks, these dragons that stick around on the board and force your, they kind of like attack and defend at the same time, and a lot of 3 blocks. So Dromai is just really about like finding that card efficiency and trying to just like play like win the turn cycle, play good value, you know, blocking and attacking for as much total as possible kind of thing.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. Dromai's the most flexible hero in this set, I think, but it is a little bit just her general cards are very close to what both the other heroes can do in efficiency. So it's very easily you can how do I say this? You can brick a little bit easier with Dromai, where you can have some really inefficient turns with Dromai, and trying to avoid that would be the main way to really succeed on Dromai. And I think one of the things you really should be looking out for would be Helios Miter. And on turn 0, or if you go first, or if your opponent goes first, doesn't really matter. But to activate Helios Miter on your first turn to pitch your red cards to start off with some ashes, if you do need these ashes, is a very easy or good way to make sure that your first couple of turns is padded by the 2 ashes you can generate on turn 0, and you can generate more ashes later. But sometimes if you do just try and start opening with a dragon, it could be quite awkward, and you might need to do some bad plays to even try and play 1 dragon if you don't have a miter to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you keep in mind that once you Helios Miter, if it's on your opponent, like if your opponent has the turn and they're going first, they do still have their action points, so you do have to be a little careful, especially in Defy. But if you get the opportunity to do this, it's definitely a huge advantage, because a lot of Dromai's cards require like Skittering Sands and the Dragons actually say transform target Ash. So you have to have an Ash in play to even be able to play them. Even though like you might pitch a red and get the Ash and go Ash neutral, if you don't start the turn with 1 in play, you can't play them. So kind of like floating and having at least 1 Ash there for you whenever you want is pretty important. You can't always manage to do it, but when you can, it's very good, and starting the game with it is ideal.
Okay, now let's move on to some key cards for Dromai. Let's start off with red Go Again starters. So these are all the cards with Go Again. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Yeah, so I think maybe probably in my opinion, the most powerful one is red Rake the Embers. It kind of does everything. It makes Ash and it makes multiple dragons, and this card is good in every matchup. The Arcane Barrier and multiple Ash Wings is fantastic into Icelander, but even into Dromai, if you have Ash Wings and your opponent doesn't have Ash Wings and they have to spend cards to kill your Ash Wings, that's just a ton of value. And even Fi, like, yeah, he does have the Phoenix Flames, but when you start making like 3 Ash Wings, it's actually quite a bit of damage that adds up over time and is hard for him to deal with. So I think that Rake the Embers is a card that is kind of overperforms and might be one of the more important commons. That being said, I think like the first one is really big value. The second one is pretty good. And then 3 almost feels like too much. The card blocks for 2, and you really ideally kind of want to be getting 3, at least 2, and often 3 Ash Wings out of it. And so I found that like 3 is almost like a bit of an overload, but having the first 1 or 2 copies is pretty important.
Yeah, it's quite hard to generate 3 ashes before playing Rake the Embers. When your third Rake the Embers can generate 3 Ash Wings each time, I think the third one will be still okay, but that's just not the case a lot of the times. So it's more of like if you have that ash generation somehow, it might be okay, but it's very difficult and not reasonable for you to be able to make that many ashes in every game.
Yeah. And it is worth noting that like in a sense you only really need the one ash floating if you pitch a red for rake because you'll get one from the pitch, one from Rake the Embers itself. So if you started with one, that means you can get three. However, if you do that, you also no longer have any ash, so it might turn off some of your dragons. And sometimes you might only want to transform two if you know, like maybe you've been playing the game for a bit and you have some dragons you haven't seen and you want to be able to play them. You might not be able to, or it might be a big risk to try and transform that last ash.
Okay, let's move on to Billowing Mirage and Sweeping Blows. What do you think about these cards?
I think that they're both really good, just as 3 blocks and 3 power go again starters. Um, Billowing Mirage is the more, I guess, quote unquote efficient card because it makes an Ashwing and it's sort of like a 4-for-1. But it does require the Ash to do that. And I think that we'll talk about this in the deck outline as well, but I think you really need to balance how many ways you have to make Ash with how many ways you have to spend it. And if you have too many ways to spend it and not enough ways to make it, you're going to have a bad time because pitching the reds is just, you can do it in a pinch. You can do it going first sometimes if you absolutely have to, or like if you're going second and you're playing into your opponent, like maybe you can get away with doing it for one turn. But like once you're really into like the back and forth of the game, you don't really want to be pitching red most of the time. And so yeah, you don't always get the value out of it. Sweeping blows is like always a 3-for-1 and it's solid and it makes an ash, but the rate on it's not great. So I think both these cards are important because they're red go agains and 3 blocks, but um, keep in mind there's still 3 power attacks, and I think sometimes you can fall into a trap of like trying to hold onto your hand to play these, and it's just not always worth it. Like if you're doing 2 cards to do 3 damage and make an Ashwing, it's not great.
Yeah, and remember these cards do block for 3, so if you need that 3 life point swing somehow, if you just block with it, it'll generate you 3 life that way. Let's move on to the senpais, or senepais.
Yeah, so there's Dunebreaker Senpai, which is the 5-for-1 with Phantasm that makes an Ash when you pop it. This one is quite good as a starter. Like in particular, the red one's really good. The rate of 5 power for 1 cost is very good, and it pairs nicely with the other Senpai, Ember Maw, which comes in for 8. This one doesn't have Go Again and isn't a starter, but I think is still a staple for the deck just because it's so far above rate. The 8 power and 3 block, if you compare that to like Brother in Arms, which is 6 power and 2 block, for the same cost, you can see like just how efficient this card is. So I think pairing that Ember Maw Senpai with a Dunebreaker Senpai or with a Billowing Mirage or Sweeping Blows is like one of the kind of bread and butter Dromai lines that you want to be looking out for and doing. Rake the Embers is also a good one. So like some kind of 1 cost go again into it is good, but you can also play it as a 2 card hand, and that's totally reasonable too.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna start calling this card senpai just because it's a little easier to say.
Yeah, for sure.
But what is the what about the yellow and the blue versions of these cards? What do you think about those?
I think they're all decent. I actually quite like the yellow and blue Ember Maw in particular, just because like a blue that attacks for 6 is really good, and the yellow for 7 is like just also really solid. So I'm quite happy with all the pitches for Ember Maw Senpai, and I think that it's actually like a pretty high pick. Dunebreaker is okay. I don't mind the yellows as 4-for-1s, but I would say that because you also have the liability of Phantasm on it, it is fine, but not a high priority pick. It's like a above average filler, is how I would say it.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. Just a note, both Rake the Embers, Bellowing Mirage, and Sweeping Blows, those 3 are not that great in yellow and blue, I don't think. They are, the 3 blocks on them are good, and if you need the blue pitch, I think those are okay. But playing them for their card is like not really ideal. Like Sweeping Blow, 1 cost for 1, making Ash is quite bad, I think.
Yeah, I do kind of like the card just because it has the utility of making an Ash and it's a 3 block, but you're certainly not. Mm, it's certainly not what you're hoping to do. It's just nice to have some utility in your blue if you have nothing else to do with it.
Okay, so next we're gonna talk about the dragons. These are all at rare, at least the ones we're gonna talk about right now. And we're gonna start off with the zero cost dragons. They are Azulai and Chromai. So Asvalai is a 2 power 3 health dragon, and it says whenever Asvalai attacks, you may have it deal 1 arcane damage and up to any 2 targets. What do you think about this, Yuki?
I think Aswell is a great, like a very solid dragon. There are better ones, but I think that overall Aswell is quite powerful. It's sort of like a 3/3 in a sense because of the arcane damage. And blocking it is always inefficient. I like that it has the 3 toughness in particular, like against Icelander. It is fairly hard for them to do 3 damage on your turn to kill the dragon and end your turn. And just in general, like as Dromai, if you have a few zero cost go again starters, it can be really good because sometimes you find yourself in a spot against Fi where maybe you have like two Aether Ashwings and the game is quite close. And just having the zero cost starter as a way to kind of turn on those Ashwings can be a route to victory. And so I think Aswell is really good for that. And also excels in the mirror because it can sort of deal with like 2 Ashwings or 2 dragons. Like if you ever get like Hyloria and an Ashwing, it's just a huge blowout.
Yeah, I think those are good points. And the other zero cost dragon's Chromai. Chromai just says once is a 3 power, 2 health dragon that says once per turn when it attacks or leaves the arena, it gains 1 action point. So, which one do you think is better as a zero cost dragon? Do you like Azulai better or Chromai better?
I think overall in limited, I like Aswell just a little bit better. It's definitely the stronger of the two in the mirror. And I think even though Chromai kind of gives you some insulation from poppers, there's not that many poppers in limited. And the 2 health just makes it a little bit easier to kill. So I kind of value the 1 extra toughness on Aswell and also just being harder to block. Like the 2 and 1 split damage is never going to be a clean block, whereas the 3 attack can often just be blocked by a 3 block. But I think they're both decent for being zero cost starters.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. Then next we're going to move on to the 1 cost dragons. We have 3 in this section. It's Kyloria, Miragai, and Yenderai. Let's start with Kyloria. So Kyloria is the 4 power, 2 health dragon, and it says whenever Kyloria hits a hero, gain control of an item, which there is 0 items in the set, I believe. And if you don't control an item, or if you don't take an item this way, you draw a card. How is this card?
Kyloria's got to be one of the best dragons. The way of thinking about this card is that it's always going to trade up on cards. The 4 power breakpoint is always good in Flesh and Blood, but when you attach a draw a card hit effect to it, it's especially good. And then when you attach a body to it as well that your opponent then has to deal with, the value on this card is really good. So like you think about the play patterns, your opponent can take 4 and then spend a card to kill it, and you've drawn a card. That's great value. Your opponent spends 2 cards blocking this and then has to spend a card killing it. That's like still like your 1 pitch and Kyloria for 2 of their cards, or sorry, 3 of their cards. So no matter what, this card's like always trading up on cards, and for that reason, it's quite good. Just keep in mind that at 2 health, it is fairly vulnerable to Icelander. I don't think that means that you don't. I think most of the time you just play it and make them have it, but keep in mind that they can kill it on your turn and end your turn. So if you have like other dragons to attack with first, you might want to attack with them.
Yeah. Okay, and let's talk about Miragai. Miragai is the 2 power, 4 health dragon, and it just says your first dragon attack each turn loses and can't gain Phantasm.
Yeah, so mostly a 2/4. The popper protection's kind of nice, but I think you can mostly think of this dragon just for its like raw vanilla stats. And I think it's pretty good. In general, I think you'll find that dragons that attack for an okay amount and have higher toughness are just better because they take more to answer. So I like Miragai a decent amount. I don't think it's like I think like Rake the Embers is probably a bit better card than Miragai, but I do think Miragai is like a pretty strong dragon.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And lastly, it's Yendurai. Yendurai is a little bit more complicated. It is a 3 power, 3 health dragon. And when it enters the arena, it enters an arena with an endurance counter on it. And then it says when Yendurai would be dealt damage, if it has an endurance counter, it prevents 3 of that damage and removes the counter.
Yeah, so Yunderai, I think, is really strong. Attacking for 3 in particular makes it very hard to ignore. And Yunderai is always going to be at least 4 toughness. Like if you think of maybe they Phoenix Flame this for 1 and then they have to hit it for 3, that's 4 toughness. Alternatively, they can just like do 6 all at once since it prevents the first 3 damage. But it's always going to be at least 4 toughness and from multiple sources. And because it attacks for a pretty decent amount, like 3 is kind of a hard amount to ignore. I think Yandere is just really good. So again, just like the raw stats on the dragon is kind of what you're looking for. And the low cost, the 1 cost is very nice.
Yeah, I think both the 0 cost and the 1 cost dragons are just great starters anyways. So I think you want to play basically all of them and as many as you can get. So we'll move on to the 2 cost dragons next. We have Themai and Uvia. Let's talk about Uvia first. Uvia is a 1 power and 6 health dragon. And at the start of turn, or when Uvia enters the arena, transform 1 Ash you control into an Ashwing. So this is a start of turn trigger, so no one can respond to this ability. The Ashwing does just come out, and no one has priority during this phase. How do you like this card?
It's very good into Icelander since you tend to have a lot of Ash. Just pitching to Arcane Barrier in that matchup, and the Ash Wings are a huge problem. Also, 6 power is just really hard.
6 toughness, 6 toughness.
Or sorry, yeah, six toughness is just really hard for Icelander to ever answer. So Uvia can just honestly win the game by herself against Icelander, and for that reason, I think she's like a decent card. But I probably hope not to play this card against Fi or even in the mirror, honestly. You often don't have that many Ash to transform into Ash Wings off of it. And in particular, Fi can really just ignore Uvia's 1 damage per turn. It's not that much. They can just say, well, she has 6 toughness. I'm not going to deal with her. I'm just going to hit you, deal with it. And because she costs 2, she's like a pretty big commitment to play. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Uvia outside of the Icelander matchup. What about you, Jay?
Yeah, I think Uvia's great against Icelander. I think we'll talk about that more when we talk about Icelander. So let's just move on to the next dragon first. And that's Themai. Themai is a 3 power, 4 health dragon, and it says your opponents can't play cards or activate abilities during your turn.
So again, obviously Jose's Icelander, 4 toughness, not the easiest to deal with, turns off her like primary game plan of playing on your turn. That being said, I think Themai is just a solid dragon all around, just because it has good stats. The 3 power is quite a bit, and the 4 toughness is kind of annoying to deal with. If you can ever play like a Dunebreaker Senpai into a Themai, that's a pretty good turn. You got to figure you have like, you're presenting 5, then 3, and then your Themai sticks around and has 4 health, and if they don't kill it, then it's going to do 3 again every turn. So unlike Uvia, Themai can't be ignored.
Yeah. Then let's move on to the 3 cost dragons next. We have Necria and Vinserakai. I think that's how you pronounce that one.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, let's talk about Vinserakai first. It says it's a 6 power dragon with only 1 health, but it says whenever Vinserakai hits a hero, he deals 3 arcane damage to them. So this could hit for 9 if you're at if it does connect.
Yeah, Vinserakai is a decent dragon. I think he's definitely on the weaker side because of the 1 toughness. He's just very easy to answer. I think that Vinserakai kind of shines in the Fi matchup in particular because that's a deck that really doesn't want to block and has a lot of 2 blocks. So yes, it's expensive, but the 9 life point swing and then forcing them to hit this, potential 9 life point swing, or if they want to block it, it's like often 3 cards, is just really solid. So I do think it's pretty good against five, but into Icelander, this card is almost unplayable. It's so easy for them to do one arcane and just take your 3 cost dragon and your pitch card and the rest of your turn. So it's kind of a sideboard card. I think Dromai also has a fairly easy time dealing with this with the Ashwings and has a lot of 3 blocks. So
Yeah, it's like a one-time use card, I think, because even the Fi can just poke it with a Phoenix Flame and it pops down. So, well, let's talk about the next dragon. We're gonna talk about Necria. Necria is the 4 power dragon with 7 health. But whenever Necria deals or is dealt damage, you put a -1 counter on her and then create an Ash token. How good is this one?
I think Necria might be my pick for strongest dragon. The 4 power and pseudo 7 toughness is very good. I say pseudo because she does lose life every time, and so if you attack her for 6, then her life total will drop to 6 and she'll die. Or you could do like 4 and 1, and that would be 2 instances of damage, so her life total would be 5 and she would die. So you don't always have to do you pretty much never have to do exactly 7 damage, but still, she's very hard to remove. She does a ton of damage, and she makes you a bunch of ash, which is great. The only time she feels really bad is when your opponent gets to pop it, because the 3 cost is such a big commitment. So if she does get popped, it's a pretty big feels bad, but like this card can pretty much solo Icelander and sometimes, and is just very solid and very good stats against all of the other heroes as well.
Yeah, one note about Necria, if you do block out, or if your Necria gets blocked out, so if it deals no damage to your opponent, it actually doesn't get a -1 counter, and you don't make an Ash. On offense, if it gets blocked out, it won't lose a health, so then you can keep on pressuring your opponent with this card without it basically taking damage, which is a pretty big game.
Playing against Necria, if you're ever on the other side of the board, keep in mind that you can kind of, like, a common play pattern I find myself doing is blocking for 3, and then yeah, they get the Ash, but it does lower her health, and then I only need 5 damage on the next turn. So like, there's a lot of heroes that can leverage this. You could then kill it with like a critical strike or a lava burst or like an ice bolt. Like, there's a lot of ways to deal 5 damage. So yeah, sometimes that's a way to, they still get good value out of the card. It's still, that's still an 8 point, 9 point swing. And they get like 2 ash out of it, so it's still really good. But yeah, it's one of the more efficient ways to answer Necria a lot of the time, is just to let the 1 damage leak over.
Okay, so let's rank the dragons from best to worst. Which dragons is your favorite, Yuki?
I think my favorites are probably Necria and Kyloria and Yendurai. I think that these 3 just sort of like have the best stats and tend to trade up on cards. And I would say that they're quite a bit better than the best commons. Like, I think they're better than your Rake the Embers or Ember Moss Enterprise or.
Okay, yeah, I think I agree. I think Necria is really good, and Kyloria is really good. Not too sold on Yendurai yet. I think I like the zero cost dragons a little bit better than Yendurai right now. Just because the zero cost dragons are quite a bit more flexible. You can block out with 3 cards in your hand and then just play that zero cost dragon and start taking back tempo. But Yendurai still requires a 2-card hand to play. But the zero cost dragons is just come out of nowhere essentially, and your opponent can't really play around it at all.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I like Asvalai and Chromai quite a bit as well, and they're probably like moving into our next tier, I guess, like maybe about as good as the close to on par with the top commons. I would probably put like Asvalai and Chromai, and like maybe like Miragai and Thamai a little bit below them. But I think Asvalai and Chromai are like pretty close for me to like some of the better commons like Rake and Ember Moss and Apai. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, Miragai, Yendurai, Asvlai, Chroma, I think that's in like one category for me. And then Kyloria and Necria is just like, oh, you see this 4th pick, you're like, okay, this is my signal, and I'm gonna maybe move into Dromai.
Yeah, Necria in particular, I would even be willing to first pick. I think it's good enough that I'd be willing to speculate on that card. Pretty often, honestly. I think it's like one of the higher picks in the set, probably.
Yeah, that makes sense. So who do we have left? We have Uvia and Vincerakai. You don't like these at all?
I wouldn't say that I don't like them at all. I just think that majority of the time, actually pretty much always, I'm going to be taking those premium commons over it. So if there's like red Xenopais, if there's red Rake, maybe even like Dust Up and Sweeping Blows, I might take over them. That's like getting kind of close, but definitely over those like top three. I think yeah, they're quite a bit better than Sarakai and Uvia, which are like a little bit more situational.
I think for myself, Vincerakai has been very disappointing in just a lot of circumstances, so I just don't pick this card almost ever anymore. Uvi, on the other hand, I do pick quite a bit just because it's just like so good against Icelander. And when you are in that matchup, you just do want a way to like pressure the Icelander player from a different angle. And Uvia does this very, very strong. Forces your opponent's so it forces the Icelander to do so much that I like this as a sideboard pick more than a main board pick.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess when I say I would take the top commons over it, I mean like it kind of depends how my deck's going. If my deck is like already very good and I feel like I'm doing very well in playables, Uvia goes up in my pick order. And if I feel like I'm kind of scrapping for playables, she's like a little bit less important to me. If it's like early on, she's not really like a reason I'll go into Dromai for the most part, but she might kind of like, I don't know, if I already have some Dromai cards, I might pick her up.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to talking about some of Dromai's Majestics. Let's talk about the 6-cost dragon first, which is Invoke Dracona Optimi.
Yeah, so the 6 cost is just a huge commitment. You do get a 6/6, and what is the text on it? When you attack with it, you reveal is it the top 3 cards, and for each red you do 2 arcane.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it does.
Okay, yeah. So it can do anywhere from 0 to 6 arcane. I will say that this card is a beating. Recently, I played a draft where I went first as Icelander. My opponent made an Ash on my turn, and then they slammed Dracona Optimi and dealt 4 arcane off the top, and I pretty much lost the game right away. Actually, sorry, I wasn't Icelander. I was Fi. My friend also played against the same player and was Icelander and also lost instantly. So I don't think that's necessarily like representative of the card overall. I don't necessarily think it's a high priority pick, but if you ever do resolve this card, it is a house, and unless they have a popper, like it probably ends the game. Even if they can answer it as fire or something, it's just so much value. Like it's like attacking for 6, blocking for 6, and maybe some arcane on top. So I don't know. Not a high priority pick, but definitely a playable card, especially because it blocks 3.
Yeah, it's just the only problem with this card is the 6 cost. If it comes onto the board and if it resolves, you're gonna win the game off of it. But if you try too hard to resolve this card, you might lose the game before this card resolves. And that's the only problem with it. If this costed like 4, this card would be bonkers first pick slam. But it costs 6, appropriately costs 6. So it is the high risk, high reward card of the set, I think.
Yeah, I think if I had it, if I could take it as not like too high a pick, I didn't have to give up too much. I would definitely play it in my deck, but I'd say that I'm very willing to block with it. Don't get too greedy with it. But if you have the 2 blues and you can slam this card, like it's probably worth taking an okay amount of damage to do. It's a beating.
Okay, let's move on to Evoke Tomotai. Tomeltai?
Yeah, Tomotai.
Tomotai. Okay. This one's the 5 power, 5 health dragon. This one says whenever attacks a hero, reveal the top 2 cards of your deck. If there's 1 red card in it or more, you put that many -1/-1 counters on an equipment they control, and if it has 0 power or less, destroy it.
The equipment destruction is pretty close to irrelevant in limited. The equipment's just not that good, and a lot of the equipment in the set breaks as well. Like you once you use it, it's gone. So for that reason, I really wouldn't rate it on that. And I think of this as mostly a 5 mana 5/5 and or 5/5 resource 5/5. Sorry, and unlike Dracona Optimi, it does not win the game on the spot. So I think that Tumulti is like you can put it in your deck. It's okay because it blocks 3, and if you resolve it, like yeah, a 5/5 is hard to deal with, but it's not a high priority pick at all for me.
Yeah, same for myself. I think it's just this card's just like a worse Themi. Like it's just I'd rather have a Themi over this card.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay, let's move on to Invoke Dominia. Before we move on to this card, actually, for all of these three dragons are legendary. I didn't know this until this Sunday, actually. I thought that if you had multiple of these, you can play multiple, but apparently you can't. And that was just like a big mind blown for me. And then just scraps all of my Dromai CC lists that I was working on. But that aside, let's move on. So Dominia is a 4 power, 4 health dragon. It says whenever Dominia attacks a hero, reveal a top card of your deck, and if it's a red card, you get to look at your opponent's hand and banish any card from it.
I think that while Dominia is probably one of the better ones in CC, she's just okay in draft. If you get the 4 mana 4/4 or the 4 cost 4/4 that, and you do the thing like you hit a red, it's pretty good. But 4 cost is just a lot to pay. Like that's always going to be a 3 card hand, and can you use the other 2 resources? I don't know. It's not always easy to, and yeah. So I think overall, like Dominia is not super impactful, but she's okay. I think again, I'd probably rather have a Themi just for the lower cost, but if you can resolve her, she'll do some work.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think Themai is pretty close to it. They both have 4 health. This one has 2 more power. 1 more power? Only 1 more power, sorry. So yeah, if you can attack with Dominia twice and rip 2 cards, it is insane, but you don't really get to control the top card of your deck much in limited. And you having to bank on hitting a red off the top is a big liability, I think.
Yeah, and as much as I think like your ideal Dromai deck does have a lot of reds, you don't always have the luxury of playing as many reds as you want. Like sometimes you have to play some extra yellows and blues, and that's just how it is. So it doesn't hit as often as it does in CC either.
Okay, let's move on to Dromai's other mythic, which is Burn Them All. So this card is a illusionist action aura card, so it stays on the board. It does have go again, and it's only in red strip, so it turns all of your dragons to go again. But it reads once per turn, when a dragon you control attacks, it deals 1 arcane damage to each opposing hero. And has a second text, at the beginning of your end phase, put a raise counter on Burn Them All, then destroy it unless you banish a red card from your graveyard for each raise counter on it. How good is this card?
I don't think it's great, but I think that it is surprisingly playable just because it is a 0 cost red starter, and it does represent damage that is actually like potentially pretty hard to block. I have seen 1 or 2 Fi games, Dromai versus Fi games, where this card actually ended up getting pitched early, and man, 2 Ashwings with this card out when the game's tight is pretty scary. So I think that this card is real. I don't think it's a very high pick, but I think that if there's not much left in the pack and you need red go against starters, you can play it. It blocks 3 most of the time, and occasionally it can be relevant in the end game. But it's like a pretty low priority pick. I would definitely take like all your powerful commons over it. Sweeping Blow, Billowing Mirage, I think pretty much any of the other 3 block starters are going to be better than this card, but it's okay.
Okay, and there's 2 more mythics I want to talk about. All I want to say about these 2 is that they're unplayable. So these ones are Frightmare and Semblance. I'm going to talk about Frightmare first. It is a 3 cost, 13 power, no block attack action card. And it says, play Frightmare only if an illusionist attack action card you control has been destroyed by Phantasm this turn. And it itself has Phantasm. This card you can't cast this card, right, in this format?
You can. It's just exceptionally hard. You have to use silent stilettos, which cost three. Then this costs three, so you're already up to six resources. Plus, you had to play something with Phantasm. So you're pitching three cards, playing a card with Phantasm. They have to pop it. Then you use stilettos and this card to attack for 13. It's I don't know if like I'm sure that somebody has pulled this off, but it's a five card hand and it's not really going to come up, and the card doesn't block. So just don't put this card in your deck. Um, it's a trap.
Okay, let's talk about Semblance next. So Semblance is a illusionist instant, and it says negate all. Oh, sorry, it's a 3-cost illusionist instant, and it says negate all phantasm triggered effects of target illusionist that attack you control. The attack loses and can't gain phantasm.
Yeah, so the idea with this card is if your opponent blocks with a popper, you can respond by playing Semblance, and then their popper doesn't pop your attack. And I guess that's kind of okay, except that it costs you a card and three additional resources as well. Like Semblance costing three is a huge problem. I would think of this card as a blue bauble, so a slightly better bauble. Don't expect the text on it to do anything. And I think every blue in the set is better than this card.
Yeah, I think so. Just a note, if your attack gets popped, you can just also use Silent Stiletto. So if you have a blue, any other blue, and you can just attack with a different card. So I don't really understand why you would ever need Semblance.
Yeah, yeah. Cards just it's not great in constructed. It's not great in limited either.
Okay, let's move on to the game plan against each of the heroes next. Let's start off with the game plan against Fi, and as usual, the question is, do you want to go first or second in this matchup as Dromai?
I think you really want to go second into Phi. You need to be able to hit them hard early, and if they hit and if you don't, you can fall behind really really fast. If they push you onto the back foot, it can be really hard to get tempo back unless they brick somewhere. So yeah, strong preference for second.
Yeah, I would also just say if you're up against Fi, just don't let the Fi player go second. And I think that's just a general good rule of thumb. No matter who you are, who you're against, don't let Fi go second. And I think that would be a good rule to keep to win more games, essentially.
Yeah. And I think when you're playing against Phi, you really want to have the option to hit them hard with like Dunebreaker into Embrama, because then that's three cards for, if they're red, that's three cards for 13 damage, which is actually like probably like a little bit above Phi efficiency or like comparable to Phi efficiency. So that's like kind of the things that you're looking at doing. You could also block with three cards, Arsenal and Ember Moss and a Pie, and then like later block with three more cards and attack with it for 8. So you're just looking to play like very efficient 1 to 2 card hands unless you have tempo. I think like Dust Up is also pretty solid in this matchup as just a 4 power that if they don't hit it, you also get an Ashwing that might save you a health or a chip in for damage later on. So yeah.
Yeah, I think this is also a matchup where the chunkier dragons, mostly Necria and any of the 4 health dragons, can do a lot of work because the 5 player will have to deal with them or take a lot of damage. So Necria being the best one, hitting for 4 each turn, just blocking out for 12 and then hitting back for 4, and they can't just ignore that. So whenever they do deal with the Necria, you get to save another 2 or 3 card hand again, and you can take back tempo that way. So I think the high toughness dragons here is a key to winning this matchup.
Yeah. I also like I do like Red Rake if you can ever resolve it and make 3 dragons. Like that's a pretty good 2-card hand. Because you come in for 3, then you still have the Ashwings that they can't clean up right away, and they're going to continue to chip in. So that's like another really solid play to look out for. But yeah, you're like efficiency is the name of the game. Phi is a super efficient deck, and you need to keep up with that. And keep in mind that you're really not going to have many opportunities to generate Ash against Phi. And so you need to be thinking about I think, what is in your deck that spends Ash and prioritizing that. Like if you have a Necria, it might be correct to just save an Ash for Necria, and your game plan is like get to Necria or like get to a red rake. I think you really want to be thinking about how you're spending that Ash, because it is so hard to generate against Fi when there's so much pressure.
Yeah, just taking damage to try and generate Ash is not the way you can win this game. You do need to just hold these Ash, and even if it means just blocking with a Chromai or blocking with one of these other dragons, it's probably better to use that as a block than to use up an Ash to play these less valuable dragons.
And maybe the last thing for this matchup is just try to stay healthy so that you can kind of like play your one and two card hands when you have the opportunity to. I think like the healthier you can stay, the better. Again, like against Fi, when you get to like kind of like 14ish, you're probably starting to get into the danger zone where you have to block. Like certainly when you get to like 8 or less, I think you can expect that they might just strip most of your hand every turn. So yeah, if you stay high life early by blocking with your 3 blocks, you give yourself more opportunity to play those efficient attacks when you draw into them, and look to do that.
Yeah, okay. Then let's move on to Icelander. Do you want to go first or second against Icelander?
This is a close one for me. I think that you want to go second just for the tempo. And like often Icelander can try and hit you first, but especially if you have silent stilettos, like you can miter and silent stilettos and stop a lot of the damage and maybe get some Ash. And then like if you ever open up with a dragon going second, I think that's one of the best starts you can do. Going first is okay too, though. You can just pitch to miter, get some Ash, and if you get to play a dragon, it's you're pretty far ahead. So I think either one is okay, but I think I lean towards second. I'm not super confident on that though.
I like going first, I think, as Dromai against Icelander. Just because even if it's you play some really bad attack like a blue sweeping blow, um, I think just being able to easily generate Ash without a risk of really getting leveraged by like Fi going second. Icelander going second is not as scary, and I think the Ash generation or being able to generate Ash is so important that if it requires you to play a card from your hand to make an Ash on turn one, you should definitely do that. And you do need like an abundance of Ash in this matchup because you want to turn as many of them into Aether Ash Wings. Um, so that Icelander has to deal with it instead of dealing or pointing her arcane damage at you.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I do think that like first and second is fairly close in this matchup, unlike maybe like the Fi matchup where it's very, very clearly second. I think either one, you're in an okay spot.
Yeah, I think depending on how your deck is constructed, if you don't have that much Ash generation, just go second and start hitting Icelander hard.
So yeah, we kind of mentioned it already, but Silent Stilettos, very, very good card against Icelander, just purely for the Arcane Barrier. You do have Arcane Barrier from your Ashwings, but just having the one static on the board that you start with is huge and can save you a ton of health and really makes the matchup much, much better. I think it's even more important for Dromai than it is for Fi, because Dromai is a little bit slower most of the time.
Yeah, I think if you do have Silent Stilettos, and if you have a couple of Rake the Embers, or basically any good ways to make Ash Wings, I think your default option is to just fatigue out Icelander. Icelander doesn't have that much damage output if you count up all of the damage in her decks. If you can generate 2 to 3 ash wings and then pitch a blue or 2 blues every turn to block out all of her damage, she can easily run out of damage if Icelander doesn't have singes. And that might just be the most efficient and the easiest way to deal with Icelander than to try and keep up with her tempo, because Icelander can do a lot of damage in very short bursts. But if you have AB4, AB5, and if you can just block all of that damage every turn, Icelander has a hard time dealing with your Ashwings and Dragons in general. So you do get to slowly move ahead by poking with an Ashwing every turn, or if you have like a Themai, being able to poke with that every turn, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And I think that if you are on this plan, keep in mind that it's just okay to pass. Like if you have an Embermaw Senpai in your arsenal, and let's say like they hit you hard on their turn and you had to pitch 3 cards to deal with it, and all you have is a blue left, it's okay to just pass and preserve your life. And if they hit you, you just block with the blue, and that's fine. And you can save the Ember Maw for another turn. I think like overextending, if your plan is to fatigue Icelander and run her out of cards, overextending is one of the ways that you can get yourself into trouble.
Yeah, just draw go, draw go, draw go. Only doing AB is very annoying. Being on the Icelander side, so that is a good way. The next card I just want to talk about in this matchup is Oasis Respite Red. This one, particularly the red one, because this is an instant, but it is still a red card. If you play this card on your turn, it turns all of your dragons, or it gives all of your dragons go again still. So you can play this card for essentially no value to turn on all of your dragons if you really need to. I wouldn't recommend it that many, but I'm just saying as a last ditch effort, if you need to play a red to give all of your dragons go again, you can do that.
Yeah, I have actually been the victim of this from the Icelander side, where I hit my opponent very hard. They had 1 card left, and then my plan was to hit them hard on their turn as well. And they Oasised my, I think it was like an Ice Bolt, and then gave all their dragons go again. And that was quite bad for me.
Okay, and let's talk about life threshold. How much health do you want to be as Dromai against Icelander?
Honestly, just the higher the better. I think that if you have lots of Ashwing generation and you have lots of you have like the silent stilettos, you can just sit back, make them show you that they can kill you, and just preserve your life total. You tend to get quite a bit of Ash because you can just pitch your reds into Arcane Barrier, and then you can play your dragons, which are harder to deal with. And it's not to say you can't attack, but it's not. I would say the pressure is on Icelander to end the game more so than it is for you. If the longer the game goes, the better the game is for you. So just preserve your life as much as you can.
Okay, and then let's move on to our last one, which is the mirror. Do you want to go first or second in the mirror?
I think in the mirror, I want to go second, but I will give the caveat that I haven't played this matchup very much. I played it like once or twice. Um, I think that I think that the mirror is very value oriented, and that like often you play most of the cards in your deck. It's almost kind of like a guardian mirror where it's like about efficiency and kind of like setting up second cycle and trading cards for cards and like how efficiently you do that. So I think that going second and being able to get some tempo is like pretty good, but I am not entirely confident that that is the case. I could definitely see just like going first and making some ash to set up your dragons being like also very strong. So this is the one I'm probably the least confident on about first or second.
Yeah, for myself as well, I don't think I've ever played the mirror yet. Most of the time when I am on Dromai, I just only face Icelanders and Fis because of how, as we said earlier, in a draft pod, we should really only be in it if we're the only Dromai or 2 Dromais. And it's just hard to play the mirror in these situations where you're the only Dromai on the pod. And yeah, I don't think it matters too much because, as Yuki said, it's like the older mirror where you just need to play the most efficient and not deck out. This will go to fatigue a lot. And because we don't have a weapon, unlike the older mirrors where the game will slowly deck each other out and then the last person with like the blue pitch wins. In this matchup, it and typically ends up being who can keep their last Ashwing, and that might win the game. So maybe even holding an extra Ashwing generation, a way to make an Ashwing might be the best way to end the game if it does go to fatigue. But otherwise, You just want to be playing your highest rate turns every single turn, and chipping away for 20 damage. I think might be the way to go.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely need to manage the dragons, and I think that, like in particular, Red Rake is a key card because the Ashwings are very good at answering other Ashwings, but are very annoying if you have to spend cards on them. So I think that if you can arsenal a Red Rake and save it, so that when they play their Red Rake, you can then play yours and clear all their Ashwings, and then put the impetus on them to have to deal with all your Ashwings, that's like a pretty good way to get ahead. So it's like a kind of a game of chicken. That being said, if you play Red Rake and your opponent doesn't have Red Rake, you can get pretty rewarded and just pull ahead that way too. So it's interesting. It just kind of depends if they have it or not, but something to consider. I think that Red Rake is quite an important card in the matchup.
Yeah, another note, you can also just pitch Red Rake. It also generates you an Ash, and then on second cycle, you can play it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another overperformer, I think, is Dust Up, just because, again, like the Ashwings are quite annoying to deal with, and then it demands 2 cards if they want to block it out. So this is kind of like if you think of from like a cards and deck perspective, this is almost always trading for 2 cards as a 0 cost, which is just like really good in a matchup that can go to fatigue.
Okay, let's move on to deck outline. So how do you want these decks to look right now?
Yeah, so I think it can be fairly flexible, and it kind of depends on the cards in your deck. Um, I think that Dromai can benefit quite a bit from having a sideboard, in particular, like the Oasis Respites. And we didn't mention this, but Sand Cover into Icelander as well is like also a pretty reasonable sideboard card. Honestly, even the yellows, like if you're on the fatigue plan, Sand Cover is just a pretty solid card. You can play some extra blues as well. So I think that Dromai, maybe more so than a lot of decks, benefits from having like different sideboard options and can be configured differently depending on if she's on the dragon plan or if she's on the more like aggro beatdown senpai plan or some combination.
I think the problem with Dromai would be that if she gets locked up into 30 cards and don't really have a sideboard, you become too weak against either Fi or Icelander, and then that can really destroy your hopes of trying to 3-0 in the draft. So you really do need to be on the open lane for Dromai, and really changing your deck will be the key to going 3-0 with Dromai. It's fairly easy if you do like hedge against Fi, and like not really have much for Icelander. You could also do that too. And then that should get you to 1-1-2 in that area, but it's just gonna be hard whenever you do face Icelander. So do you know about how many blues you want in this deck, or how many reds? Which one's the most important color you're looking at here?
I think that the color to prioritize is definitely red. You need a like you want as much as you can't pitch reds for Ash too much. You want to have the option to do it, and the red go again starters are pretty important. I think that I usually want like at least 8. Like 8 to 10 is pretty good if you're on the dragon slash Ashwing plan. Like you don't have to be like heavy on that plan, but if you have dragons and Ashwings that you're making, you have like your what is the equipment?
Silken form?
The silken form, yeah, the silken form to make Ashwings. If you have these cards, like you really want to have the red go against starters, and there's just no substitute for them. And I think that's part of why Dromai doesn't support as many players. Is you just need this critical density of those starters. So I think that's like the biggest priority for me. And then after that, I probably want to have like 6 to 8 blues against Fi, and then you can board up. Honestly, you could board up to pretty much as many blues as you want against Icelander if you're planning to fatigue. But I think most decks function pretty well on about like 8-ish blues. Like that's about like 1 blue per turn. So yeah, Dromai usually wants to be able to play dragons or play your Senepais and do that game plan.
Yeah, I think that just about sums it up. And I did notice at this point that we didn't talk about Silken Form. Let's talk about that card.
Yeah, so this probably should have been under key cards. Silken Form is a really powerful piece of equipment. You can quell with it, and note that you can use it for the quell one and then activate it to make an Ashwing. That is like, so it's just like a 1/1. So this card can be worth like a ton of value if you get the quell and then the Ashwing. But sometimes even just making the Ashwing is really, really solid, and I wouldn't be afraid to do it. Um, Especially against Fi, like I might be pretty aggressive with the activation of Silken Form, just because like sometimes you just need that pressure of the Ashwing to keep up with them.
Yeah, I would. Basically, on the first chance I get that I think I can start ripping Fi's hand, I'm going to destroy Silken Form on my turn without even quelling. To turn one of my Ash into Ashwings and start poking for one. If the Fi player ignores this Ashwing, it can start not steamrolling, but just like will start to get annoying for the Fi player, and just one damage is a lot. Like this, if you've played in Tales of Aria, Mark of Lightning was a very powerful card just because it did one unblockable damage. Silken Form can do very similar. It can turn an Ash into an Ashwing on a turn you've already activated all your dragons, and you can do one surprise damage that they're not expecting, and that could go very, very long ways.
The last thing about sort of the deck outline here is I think that you really want to be conscious about how many ways you have to generate Ash versus ways to spend Ash. The primary ways of generating Ash, I really mean like sort of Rake the Embers, but is like also a spender. And Sweeping Blows is like maybe the biggest one. If you have red Sweeping Blows, that's like your main Ash generator. You can pitch reds, but you don't, like as we said against in the Fi matchup, you just don't have time to do this. So you really don't want that many dragons. Like I've had decks with like 2 to 3 good dragons and like 2 Rake the Embers, and those were my spenders. And I had like even when I have like 4 I've had decks like this with like 4 Sweeping Blows, and it still just feels like that's kind of about what I can support. A few dragons and a few Rake the Embers, and that's kind of about it. I think that like going too hard on the dragon plan, especially without the support, can be a little bit of a trap for Dromai.
Yeah, I think Dromai is the one of the most challenging decks to pilot, where you need to really during the game manage your Ash and how many dragons and how many payoffs you can do. I've seen a couple players generate like 14 or 15 Ashes without using any of them, and then they lose the game. That's also not good. If you have too many Ash generations, you just aren't spending them or aren't doing anything with them, it's not gonna do you any good. You like these Ashes, you had to spend something to make these Ashes, so you have to make use of them, or you're gonna fall behind on card efficiency somewhere.
Yeah, because like if you think about Sweeping Blows as a 3 for 1 go again, the rate on that card is pretty bad. Like Fi has 4 for 1 go against, and like yeah, they block too, but offensively the card is just much better. So that Sweeping Blow Ash is kind of like costing you like a whole point of damage is kind of like what it's valued as on the card. And so if you're playing like it's a good card because in red because it gives your other dragons go again, but you want to be making use of that Ash, and if you're not, you're just kind of playing an inefficient card and leaving value on the table. So you need to really have both the generators as well as the payoffs. Otherwise, you're just kind of playing cards in your deck that aren't great.
Okay. I don't have anything else to say about Icelander. What about you?
No, I think that pretty much wraps us up for Dromai. I do think that she is probably the most difficult deck to draft and pilot, and also the most prone to being overdrafted. Just in general, like a lot of her yellows and blues are kind of junky. You can play them if you have to, and you prioritize the 3 blocks. But overall, like her card pool has some really poor cards. Like I think like the yellow and blue skittering and the yellow and blues, actually just sand cover in general, just like really stand out as like pretty awkward cards. I also don't like skittering just because like it blocks to, and you have to have an Ash to play it. So it's just kind of like locks you into spending and I don't know. It's okay. The red one's okay, but it's not great. All right. I think that concludes this episode of On the Bobble. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify. And if there's certain platforms that you're wanting to see this podcast on, please let us know and we can add it on there as well. As always, we are your hosts, Yuki and Jay, and you can find me on Twitter at YukiLeeBender, or you can find some of my articles on redriotgames.ca. Jay's currently not active on social media, but if you want to reach out to him, you can you can email onthebobble@gmail.com and get in touch with him that way. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and goodbye for now.
I guess we can also talk about our sealed money matches at Nats.
That's not a bad one. Didn't Ross end up taking all our money? Actually, Ross and Mateo took all of our money.
No, I think Ross took all our money. Mateo opened Shock Charmers. Okay, we're gonna talk about this now because there's enough content on this now. Okay, so at Nationals 2021 Nationals, where Yuki wins this event, I think it's after day one, correct?
Yeah, after day one, our hotel room, so that's Jay, myself, and then two of our locals, Ross and Mateo, decide that we haven't had enough flesh and blood after 9 rounds. So the thing to do is clearly get a box of Tales of Aria and play sealed. And I mean, if you're just playing limited, what's the point? You got to be playing for something, right? So we decided to play for money. And Ross in particular wasn't so used to just playing casual games for money, outside of an armory setting. So we had kind of talked him into playing money matches with us for less. I think we were playing for like $10, $10 a match kind of a thing. And yeah, it was pretty funny because after we kind of convinced him and twisted his arm to do it, he just took all of our money and ended up beating all of us, even though we were the most keen on it. And he was quite pleased with himself. And then, yeah, how did your games against Mateo go?
Oh, I think we ended up in the room. We played inside the drawer. So we opened up one of there's the TV monitor on the hotel, and there's drawers to put your clothes in. We opened one of that up because we're in a hotel room with no tables, right? There's no tables to play on. I think Yuki and Ross was playing on the bed or something that was very reasonable to do. But we're just okay, so they took that. What do we need to use? We're just opened up the drawer and we sat on both sides of it, and we're just playing Flesh and Blood inside the drawer now. I don't actually remember if I won or lost that game at this point, but that's the only thing I remember is having cards we're just throwing cards in this drawer, and then Yuki and Ross just looking at us and being like, "What are you guys doing?" And we're like, "This is a perfect platform. It's it's clean inside. It's just a flat surface, and someone can't accidentally knock over our decks by moving the bed too much."
Yeah, so if you're ever in a pinch and you really want to play some sealed after you've played all day, you know what to do. You can play in the drawer. It's actually pretty good. I actually do remember how the match went because I remember Jay and Mateo got paired first, and when they were playing, Mateo flips over Shock Charmers because he opened Shock Charmers in his pool, and Jay was going, "What? You open Shock Charmers and I'm on Briar? This is busted." And then sure enough, I think you were attacking for lethal with Rosetta Thorn, and he just Shock Charmers your Rosetta Thorn.
Oh, is that what happened? I remember him opening Shock Charmers because that was the money card to be open, and then he got to keep that. And then I guess I lost to it too, right?
I definitely remember you saying that he stopped your arcane damage with his Shock Charmers, and it mattered a lot. I don't know for sure who would have won. Sometimes it changes the game significantly, but
yeah, I'm pretty sure
it was relevant.
Yeah, now that you tell me, yeah, I'm pretty sure it won him the game because Spell Void 2 is very powerful.
Yeah, so after Jay and I are the I also ended up losing to both Mateo and Ross. So after Jay and I convinced the others to play money matches with us, we proceeded to just give them all of our money.
Oh,
So
I think
that
I
was
lost.
fantastic.
Didn't I lose to you though?
Yeah, I think I ended up beating you. So
Yeah, so I went 0-3.
yeah, I got some money back, but it wasn't a great night for either of us. We also both opened like I don't
Nothing.
know, nothing particularly notable. But you know what? It was fun.
It was fun. It was a good weekend. And then and then on the next day I get destroyed by Yuki Unlimited again. So it was a bad weekend for me, but it's something. Okay, I think that should be good. And good night. And next week we're gonna be talking about Yuki's Pro Tour prep. So don't miss that one. Bye bye.
Bye now.